I set myself a goal for this year to qualify for the Gran Fondo World Championships because it is in Australia and it would be an amazing experience to be involved in something so grand. I missed Amy's Gran Fondo last year, so Tour de Brisbane was my last chance. If I was going to make this happen, I would have to fly to Brisbane, but before that I'd have to track down a travel bag and get over the anxiety of flying with a bike. Based on my Rego recon, I was going to need to finish in the top 50 riders of my age group to make the 25% cut. This would mean completing the course in 3 hours or less and adopting a race to win mentality, which is totally new to me. Torque down your bolts and top up your tyres. I'll take you through the course, my nutrition, kit and bike along the way. But let's not waste any more time, let's get the race underway. Something like 7,000 people made getting to the start line absolute chaos. Fortunately, there were a few familiar faces.
How you feeling?
Good, mate. How you feeling?
Yeah. Getting there.
The advice I'd been given was to get to the front, even if it meant being a jerk. I'd set my mark on Brad Bannister, who I knew was a good shot for a podium if not a win today. If I could stick to his wheel, I was going to be in the right position. My overall plan of attack was pretty simple. Hold the front pack until the climb, which is about 70 kilometres in. Aim for around about 5 watts per kilo on the climb and hope to crest with a group who will work to seal the deal. Other than that, the rain added one more plan, and that was to stay upright. I managed to get within a few wheels from the front, so this was a great position to be starting the race from. I latched onto Brad's wheel and everything was going to plan. I had done a brief Strava recon of the course, but I'm not super familiar with Brisbane, so for the greatest part this was going to be a bit of a mystery tour. What was pretty clear from early on though, it was going to be a pretty gnarly day. This is probably a great opportunity to talk about the course itself. It's a pretty amazing course, a true metropolitan Gran Fondo. It showcases Brisbane City, its parks and the bridges across the river. It is linked together by motorways and tunnels. It is a total distance of 120 kilometres with around about 1,700 metres elevation. Easy enough, right? Unfortunately, in reality, it was a little more complex. Routing through a capital city and juggling logistics of thousands of riders across multiple distances and age groups made for some pretty sketchy, twisty sections littered with road furniture. I will call this part of the course the danger zone. Other than that, there were 3 out and backs on closed motorways, let's call them the speedways, then a loop in the middle containing the only climb and primary selection point. The Mount Cootha Climb is only about 2.5 kilometres with an average gradient of 7%. It's going to be an all-out effort. We'll call this the hurt circle. Escaping the danger zone for the first time was the hardest of all. There were some really gnarly sections and I couldn't capture them all because I was hanging on for dear life. I was surprised how quickly we were catching some of the other age groups. I couldn't help but notice the body count piling up and we were only 6 kilometres in. At one point the rider to my right literally just went to ground. I have no idea what happened to him, but it didn't look good. But we'd made it out alive and we were on to the first speedway. These out and back sections were long, flat and smooth. They ran in and out of tunnels and through bus terminals and were bookended by hairpin double backs. This made it very hard to move around the bunch, especially in the two-way sections. In the days leading up to the race, my daughter had tested positive for influenza A. Although my own tests were negative, I could feel the effects of my immune response. Through the first 30 minutes, my heart rate was very high. I knew that I needed to focus on keeping it at a more manageable level. My plans to follow the front markers were proving more difficult than I expected. Not from a fitness perspective, but from a pure bunch logistics side. This is probably my lack of experience coming in, but I did spend a lot of time grinding it out in the middle of the peloton. While I rumble my way through the bunch, let's talk about my nutrition plan. My first consideration was making sure I had enough water for the duration of the race. I picked up a couple of 950ml bottles. I filled these with Precision Hydration drink mix, which made for a total of 120 grams of carbs, plus the all-important electrolytes. My primary source of carbs would be a full 300 gram pouch of Flow Gel. This is a product I've really come to love, especially for its simplicity. I'll be running it in the flask again, which is just so convenient. I'll be supplementing this with a couple of caffeine gels. This is to help finish getting the morning carbs in, but also to give me a little kick and to substitute the coffees I'd normally be drinking at this time of day. All up, it gave me access to like 200 grams per hour, which is way more than necessary, but it gave me optionality in the way that I took it all. You know you were back in the danger zone when you pass through what seems to be a designated crash site. This one had ambulances waiting and a lineup of bodies each time we passed through it. At 35 k's in, we're about to hit three of the most questionable conclusions on this course. Firstly, a trip over Green Bridge. I can appreciate the value of this leg for the casual riders. It was very picturesque. But for the racers, it was another hairpin and quite a narrow two-directional traffic in and out. It was a lot of added risk for not much more than about 1.5 kilometres. Next was the trip through Hill End or West End, not sure exactly what you would call it. This was a very urban section of the course and it was littered with road furniture. There was a small climb, but it didn't force a selection because everyone was pretty rested after the previous detour. There was a brief moment where I thought the whole peloton was going to come down, but we just managed to scrape our way through. This was the only one I managed to get on camera, but this was not the only touch and go moment through here. The third odd choice was when the road narrowed and led us into the Riverside Park. This was literally a park path, which was single file at most times. To make matters worse, the riders on the front obviously had a clear run and were trying to capitalise and force a gap, which only made it faster than was comfortable on the available terrain. In more than one location there were cables across the path with speed bump covers over the top of them, which caught riders by surprise. Ultimately, we all ended up crushed into the exit to get back onto the road anyway. After all these shenanigans, we were back on the speedway on our way out of the danger zone for our second out and back. The push from the front didn't end though. The pressure to snap the elastic was strong, firstly on the bridges in the city and then on the tunnels in the way. This section was really intense, and it was the first time that I was worried that I was not going to be able to hold the wheel. But, like magic, when we reached the end, everyone sat up a little bit and it was a much more manageable pace. But the damage was done. The front bunch had been thinned just in time for it to get messy. The integration with the other age groups was starting, and it was getting hard to know exactly where you were in the pack. I could still see my marks, so I knew I was where I needed to be. While I catch my breath, this is a great opportunity to look at my bike setup. I'm riding a Factor Ostro VAM, old one, not new one, in a size 58. Durace 5236 on the front and 1130 on the back. Wheels are Black Ink 60s with tubeless GP 5000s. Power meter via Wahoo PowerPlay pedals. I'm running a Garmin 1050 computer. With all of this, saddlebag and 2 GoPros, the total weight is 8.74 kilograms. I've got to say a huge thanks to the team at Height Cycling who hooked me up with a bike travel bag. They were super helpful and guided me through the process. Be sure to pop in and check out their showroom full of Italian bike candy. We double back again, and this is where the first move started. We are now on our way back to Mount Cootha, the only climb, and there are a few shouts of "Brake!" from the peloton. But no one was having it. There were too many in the group and the speed was too high. There is no way anyone was getting away here. In not too long we hit the exit for Mount Cootha and immediately the power starts to ratchet up. Mount Cootha starts with a solid 10% section, which immediately cuts the bunch in half. I found myself on the back of the front bunch. Initially, they were pulling away, but as we rounded the first corner, I was able to hold the gap steady. My plan was not to hold their wheel, but to pick up the riders who fell off and form the second bunch. I was confident this would secure the top 50 spot I needed if we could work and hold off the stragglers when we hit the flat. Everything was going to plan, until I hit the small flat section in the middle of the climb. I took a quick moment off the gas to regroup ahead of the final pinch. Next minute, I dropped my chain. No amount of gear changes were getting it back on. I was going to have to stop and put it on manually. These were possibly the longest 15 seconds of the whole day. Just lucky it didn't happen on the really steep section, I guess. But I got straight back on the gas, and I'd only lost around 5 places of which I'd gained on the climb previously. I had a bunch of about 5 ahead of me. I just needed to catch their wheel before it flattened out. From here, the climb drags on for a fair while past the so-called top. The front side, which everybody talks about, is 2.1 kilometres, but the full climb to the top is actually 6.3 kilometres. The first 2 kilometres are very steep, but the back 4 kilometres are still fairly undulating, especially on tired legs. We crested the official KOM with a strung out bunch of about 8, who all seemed motivated to work after the descent. I was fairly reserved on the descent. I'm still regaining confidence, especially in the wet, after having a crash earlier in the year. Although I still managed to hit 80 kilometres an hour down the steep part. That is pretty wild. Back towards the speedway and time to regroup. Let's take a second to do a quick fit check. Pretty standard inclusions here for bibs and jersey. Attacker Race 3.0 for both. This kit is becoming an absolute mainstay in my wardrobe, if only Attacker could keep it in stock. One new addition is Aero socks from Fingers Crossed. It was only a matter of time before I bought into the hype. And rounded out with Oakley Sutros and Cask Utopia. Back on the speedway, we had another flyby of the danger zone before the last out and back. We'd formed a good group. We knew there were maybe 20 riders up the road in the front bunch, which would leave us in a qualifying position. We just needed to hang on to it. We got some turns rolling and we started a motor, quickly picking up bunches as we went. Coming through a tunnel, I heard my name and turned to see it was Max Mann, a fellow YouTuber and friend of mine. He started the day with the 19 to 35 group, so I knew that something had gone wrong for him. If you want to see exactly what happened to him, I'll link it up above. But I also knew that he would jump into the chop off and bring some extra firepower to our bunch. At the pace we were moving, our bunch grew pretty quickly with a lot of sandbaggers, which complicated the pace line, but the serious lads kept it together, putting in the big white turns. The last 20 kilometres threw everything at us. First it started to hammer down rain. It didn't last long, but there was enough water on the road that the wheel spray made it feel like it was still raining. I started to cramp in the hamstrings as we doubled back from the airport, and we had one more trip through the danger zone before we would reach the finish line. Now, the finish line was the last curious part of the course. The rider's guide suggested that the finish was on the bridge. This would see us come out of the bus tunnel and set up for a sprint. But this is not quite how it played out. As we emerged from the tunnel, slightly blinded by the light, before I could even start to ramp up the power, we were met by marshals telling us to slow down. The race was over. We had unknowingly crossed the finish line as we exited the tunnel. It was a great bunch of guys to finish with, all incredibly strong. It's comforting to know that these guys will be part of the crew I'll be rolling with in the green and gold later this year.
I can't unclip this thing for some reason, so I'm going to talk to you just here, but damn, that was fast. We were like 120 Ks in 3 hours just. It was wild. The rain was gnarly. I don't know if I made it. We got to wait and find out. Fingers crossed. That drop chain on Cootha might have cost me the day.
In the end, it would seem I backed the right horse. Brad came in second. Congratulations to Michael in first and Nick in third. As for me, I finished in 30th place, but most importantly, I got myself one of these little cues, which means I'm qualified for the Gran Fondo World Championship. That's it. Thanks to Tour de Brisbane and the UCI World Series. Thank you Brisbane City for loaning us your roads. Thank you to my Queensland family for coming to watch. Did you ride or race? Let me know about your day in the comments. Congratulations to everyone who qualified. I'll see you in Lawn. But other than that, folks, until next time, see ya!